Good afternoon. I would like to welcome everyone to our second webinar in a series of webinars over the next month or so as we continue into an extended period of social distancing. Today's webinar is titled RHNA, the Changing Landscape and How Cities Will Comply, presented by Cox Castle Nicholson. Thank you for your sponsorship. My name is Steve Lamott. I'm the CEO for the Building Industry Association of Orange County. And before we start, I would like to thank our attendees on the webinar today. As I'm sure most of you know, networking education is a major part of the BIA, so not being able to get together is a significant change for us. So I appreciate those watching, as your involvement will allow the BIA to continue the great work throughout these weird times. Please also visit us on our website, biaoc.com, to check out any upcoming webinars and our jurisdictional tracker, or to sign up for our advocacy tool so you can remain engaged remotely. So with that, this webinar will be pretty straightforward. Our panelists will focus on their respective topics, led by our moderator, and those watching can ask questions through our Q&A button below. I'm going to introduce our panel so our moderator can jump right into it. So we're going to start out with Council Member Mike Posey. Councilmember Posey is former mayor as well, was elected to the Huntington Beach City Council in 2014. He and his wife Jeannie have been downtown homeowners since June of 1999. Mike and Jeannie owned and operated Adventech woodworking machinery in Huntington Beach up until 2009, and he is now employed in the same high-tech machine industry. As a council member, Mike has served on numerous boards, such as the Citizen Participation Advisory Board and Chamber Legislative Affairs Committee, just to name a few. Next, we have Mayanne Johnson. She is a housing and land use planner at the Southern California Association of Governments, or SCAG, in Los Angeles, where she has specialized in housing policy and sustainable land use planning since 2006. At SCAG, she has led a variety of housing-related programs, including 3 cycles of the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, or RHNA, big topic for today, obviously, and was the primary author of SCAG's comprehensive housing publication, Mission Impossible. She graduated with a master's in urban planning from UCLA, and a BA in Honors in Legal Studies from the University of California, Berkeley. And next, our elected part of the panel, Wendy Bucknum. Wendy serves as Vice President of Developer Relations for Associa PCM, and formerly served as Governmental Affairs and Public Affairs Manager on site in Laguna Woods Village. She has been with Associa PCM since 1993. Ms. Bucknum is the past mayor of the city of Mission Viejo and has served on the council since 2014. In addition, she serves on the Southern California Association of Governments and is a board member of the BIA Orange County. Last but not least, Mike Carroll, Vice Mayor Mike Carroll, was appointed to the Irvine City Council May 14th, 2019. Prior to his appointment, he served as Vice Chair of the Irvine Planning Commission and previously served as Chair of the Community Services Commission. Mike is the City of Irvine's representative to the Southern California Association of Governments, which, as some of you may know, is the nation's largest metropolitan planning organization. Mr. Carroll is a practicing corporate and transactional attorney and the co-founder of CoreGen Counsel, a boutique legal practice based here in Irvine. And now I would like to just kick it over to our moderator, the Honorable Mike Posey. Mike, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Steve. Welcome to the Building Industry Association of Orange County's Zoom webinar. I guess this is how we're going to be meeting for a while during this pandemic. Today's topic is RHNA, or Regional Housing Needs Assessment. And particularly what we want to talk about is the changing landscape and how local cities will comply. We have an all-star packed guest list, including Wendy Bucknum. She serves currently on the City Council in Mission Viejo. She's also on the RHNA subcommittee at SCAG, so she's got some very good intimate knowledge about how the process works. We also have Vice Mayor Mike Carroll from the city of Irvine. We know Irvine is going through some explosive growth. They've got a lot of things on the horizon. They still have a lot of greenfield opportunity and infill opportunity. He's going to give us an overview of that. And we're going to start with Mayanne Johnson. Mayanne is a good friend. She's a staffer at SCAG. She's the technical go-to person on the regional transportation planning and, of course, housing and housing policy. And in particularly, she has a depth of knowledge on RHNA. So, Mayanne, start off with your insight on the process.
Thank you. My name is Mayanne Johnson. I'm a housing program manager at Southern California Association of Governments. And I have been working on RHNA for a long time. So you have probably talked to me on the phone, emailed me, or this is your first time meeting me. But I have worked on RHNA for a long time, and I'd be more than happy to continue any questions that you have, especially after this Zoom panel today. So thank you for having me as part of this panel. RHNA, no matter, even with this pandemic going on, it's still something that a lot of jurisdictions are still struggling with. And you'll see newspaper articles still about affordable housing and just housing in general. So there has been no better time to talk about RHNA than now. So for those new to RHNA, RHNA is a quantification of housing need, both existing housing need and projected housing need. So it's something that SCAG, as the Council of Governments for Southern California, that we're required to do every 8 years. And it does, we refer to them as cycles. So right now we're developing what's called the sixth RHNA, or sixth housing element cycle. So for a jurisdiction, that covers your housing element between October 2021 and October 2029. So what we're in right now is the fifth RHNA cycle, technically, because you cover your housing element between October 2013 and October 2021. So we're developing the sixth cycle, but right now a housing element covers the fifth RHNA cycle. So to get that RHNA number, that RHNA allocation that represents your existing and projected need for a jurisdiction, we first start off with a regional number. So this number represents all of the housing need for the SCAG region for this planning period, this 8-year period. And so for the sixth cycle, that's about 1.34 million units. That's housing units. But to get to this number, that number is actually given by the state, the California Department of Housing and Community Development, also known as HCD. So HCD is required by state law to give us a regional number, and they do this in consultation with SCAG and the Department of Finance, California's DOF. So to get to this number, they look at a whole host of factors, including population growth, household sizes, demographic changes, but they also look at other statistics such as cost-burdened households and overcrowded households. So once they look at all these factors, they come up with a regional number, so that 1.34 million number, and they assign this number to the Council of Governments. So they gave this number to SCAG. So SCAG's responsibility is to take this regional number and then distribute it to every jurisdiction, every city and unincorporated county in Southern California. And that number is your RHNA distribution allocation. So we come from 1.34 million, we have a methodology that we adopt, we apply that to that number, and then we get an individual RHNA allocation. So in a nutshell, that's the process. But this 1.34 million number, you'll hear a lot of jurisdictions and maybe some newspaper articles talk about how high this number actually is. And it is noticeably higher than prior cycles. So if you look at the fifth cycle that we're in right now, that was given to us at 412,000. And the cycle before that, the fourth cycle, was about 700,000 units for the region. So this 1.34 million units is noticeably higher than prior cycles. But part of that is that increased emphasis on existing needs. Since HCD determines this number, there are a lot more factors that they looked at this cycle and how they applied it to get to that large number. So the methodology itself, this is completely within SCAG's responsibilities in determining what the methodology will be to distribute this RHNA allocation. So the methodology, it has a variety of factors in it, but the methodology can differ from cycle to cycle and differs from what other Council of Governments do. So what we do for SCAG can be different from SANDAG in San Diego, SACOG or ABAG up north. And it is different, what we adopted this cycle, it's different from what we did in the fourth and fifth cycles. So in comparison, the fifth RHNA cycle, just used as the largest component of a RHNA allocation, was based on projected household growth. But for this cycle, based on a lot of comments SCAG received from stakeholders, jurisdictions, and the general public, that other factors do need to be looked at since there is a housing crisis. There's overcrowding problems, cost-burdened households. There should be a better linkage to our transit, to jobs, even to our regional transportation plan. That our methodology needs to have more components to it than just household growth. So for this cycle, SCAG adopted a methodology. This methodology was adopted last month, but it was a result of almost a year of public workshops, public comment periods, a lot of public hearings and meetings to develop this methodology. And the methodology includes three main factors. There's household growth, as we did for last cycles, but that's only one component. Now our RHNA methodology includes access to jobs and access to transit. Prior cycles only looked at that one component, whereas this time we expanded it in order to better link with our regional transportation plans and also address a lot of the comments and concerns expressed by our stakeholders. So with these three main components and also a social equity component, that makes up the majority of our RHNA methodology. So what that does on a regional scale is it puts a lot of growth or a lot of the RHNA allocation within more infill areas, within urbanized areas that have a high access to jobs and transit. So it is a remarkable departure from past cycle methodologies. But SCAG staff, in reviewing the methodology that was adopted by our board, feel strongly that this then better links to our regional transportation plans, policies, and goals. So our next steps, next month, we'll have the RHNA draft allocation out. We do have on a handy Excel sheet for all jurisdictions in the SCAG region. If you go to our website, www.scag.ca.gov/RHNA, you can actually download the draft RHNA allocation as determined by our methodology. But we'll have that officially distributed next month, and then we can start our RHNA appeals process. So the RHNA appeals process entails, it allows jurisdictions and HCD to appeal any jurisdiction's draft RHNA allocation. In prior cycles, what was allowed was you could appeal your own allocation, and that was it. So most jurisdictions ask for a reduction to the draft allocation. But for this cycle, recent law has allowed for a jurisdiction and other jurisdictions to appeal any draft RHNA allocations. So we will expect to see a lot of increases, asking for increases in RHNA allocation in addition to decreases in RHNA. So the appeals process will have a 45-day window to file an appeals. That'll begin most likely in mid-May and last through the end of June. So we'll have the dates out next month. But the general timeline is 45 days to file an appeal. Then we'll have a comment period, and then we'll have public hearings to hear all appeals. The public hearings will occur most likely in August and September. And they'll be heard by our RHNA subcommittee, who will serve as our RHNA appeals board. So they'll be reviewed and determined by the RHNA appeals board. And I wanted to point out that Councilwoman Bucknum is one of the Orange County representatives to the RHNA appeals board and subcommittee, and I'm glad to see she's on the panel today. So the appeals will be heard by the appeals board and determined at the public hearings. Any successful appeals do have to be reallocated proportionally or in some methodology back to all SCAG jurisdictions. And this is because that 1.3 million number given by HCD at the beginning of the process has to be the same number for our final RHNA allocation at the end of the process. So we'll have the appeals process and the results folded in back to the RHNA method or the final RHNA allocation. And we anticipate that'll be adopted in October of this year. So once jurisdictions have their final RHNA allocation, then they can develop their housing elements, and those are due to HCD by October 2021. SCAG staff did ask HCD about the possibility of extending or postponing that October 2021 date in order to give jurisdictions more time, given the current environment and there's a lack of resources available. Unfortunately, HCD has indicated that the October 2021 due date is in statute. So any changes to that date do have to be legislative. So if there are any other updates to these key milestone dates, SCAG staff will continue to update all of our stakeholders on any of those process and changes. So one thing I did want to note, and I want to end on a more positive note rather than just talking about 1.3 million and its difficulties in meeting these challenges. This time around, the state has actually set funding available directly to jurisdictions to help them plan not only for their housing elements, but also to accelerate housing production. Three main things. There's Senate Bill 2, which was passed a couple years ago. While it does add a recording fee to most residential most real estate transactions, it does establish a permanent source of affordable funding to fund housing production. So this last NOFA, there's about $123 million available directly to jurisdictions throughout the state to apply for this funding. And there's also last year's AB 101 bill, which provides some funding, about $119 million statewide to jurisdictions to accelerate, again, housing production and help develop their housing elements for the sixth cycle. And of course, there's also funding directly to SCAG, in which SCAG can then divert some funding. And so SCAG, we're still developing ways on how to do this. But we do want to connect these funding sources with SCAG's funding sources to help, again, jurisdictions plan and accelerate housing production. So with that, thank you again for having me today, and I look forward to a lively discussion with this panel. Thank you.
Moving over to the governmental aspect of things, on the City Council of Irvine, which is fairly significant city, 280,000 residents, 66 square miles in size. But then moving on to the SCAG board and having the opportunity to sit with some great people and work with a great staff, people like Wendy and Mike and other cities, our supervisor who sits on SCAG on behalf of Orange County, Don Wagner, and then the staff. We've had it's been jumping in. It's sort of and a full-throated approach, just trying to earn my stipend every time that we go up to to Los Angeles to sit at these meetings and advocate. The things that I've really seen, really from a process point of view, and then particularly what it means for Irvine, have been very interesting and very enlightening. From a process point of view, I think many in Orange County, and this is, again, process not necessarily affecting Irvine too much, based on the methodologies that were debated and discussed and presented by staff and then presented at community meetings like we had at Irvine City Hall and elsewhere. Months-long process was sort of undermined at the last minute by a bunch of votes for people that never really attend these meetings. And that was very disappointing just from a governance point of view and a process point of view. I mean, I serve as the secretary of boards of companies, and the idea of, New York Stock Exchange company director showing up, basically once every few years to vote on something that's crucial in this, it just wouldn't fly with the SEC, let's put it that way. So, but it happens here governmentally. It happened at SCAG, and it was unfortunate. What did it really mean for Irvine here, Mike? Our allocation moved by about 1,000 units, and that is a lot of units really in any community. But in Irvine, we were talking about going from 20,000 and change to 21 or 22,000. So Irvine is allocated I think the fourth or the fifth largest allocation in all of Southern California. So we have a pretty big interest in how this process is run, and the sort of the sad part from the process point of view, as you've mentioned, is the coastal communities and other communities not on the coast in Orange County, based on this last minute substituted methodology, essentially got assigned, far more units than they were expecting under the staff methodology. So it's really sort of a process shift. The two things, or really the three things where Irvine is affected, have to do with, in the way we get these units, is the job centers. We have two job centers that are closer than any other place within Southern California. We have a land use situation where we have lots and lots of our city's land boundary on the northern sphere of the city that are dedicated to permanent open space in an agreement that the city made with the Irvine company many years ago, although that land is counted in some way for purposes of this methodology to assign us units. And then finally, transit. It takes into account this methodology. Transit is a system that doesn't exist yet and really hasn't been mapped out yet, and we don't really know certain transit points that it assumes will be existing in the city. So we have 20,000 plus units. How are we going to build these units? I won't say it's anybody's guess. We've certainly been laying out the maps and trying to figure out how to do this. But I guess the short answer is that for many of us here at Irvine, our feeling is we're getting sort of the Bay Area and frankly, the inner San Francisco Bay Area's vision of housing and development being pushed into Orange County communities like our community in Irvine, where there seems to be a push to go vertically. And we do have vertical. We have a whole area of the city where we do that near the John Wayne Airport. But to do that sort of citywide versus, sort of building out horizontally. So that's what we're looking at right now.
Well, thanks for that insight. I know, when we think of Irvine, everybody thinks of these vast open green spaces that are still left for zoning and development. What do you see for the future of accommodating those 21,000 units in Greenfield development versus infill or repurposing?
It's a great question. I know you guys have the same challenge in Huntington Beach, and some of your possible reuse ideas and opportunities that we're going to see. We'll be going through a lot of this together, but you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm a relatively newcomer to Orange County, 2005 vintage. But I can tell you, I've been looking at it very much like, sort of Nick and the Great Gatsby getting dropped into, West Egg and seeing it from, the outside. So as an outsider looking at this and really being very, very informed on government and serving on the Planning Commission and the Parks and Rec Commission before this council opportunity, and I love maps and I have maps all over my home office here. I'm looking at them. I would tell you that it is built out. Irvine is very largely built out. Those windrows and rows of eucalyptus trees and agriculture that the Irvine company would lease out is gone. It's now housing. And it is multifamily housing, and it's single family housing, and it's attached housing, and it's a whole panoply of residential and some commercial and some retail use. The two areas that speak to me when I think about maybe we're going to have to do something here, well, three areas. Number one is the open space, and that's just that's almost a cocktail party conversation, because we have this massive amount of open space. It's been permanently dedicated. It was part of an agreement that we contractually made at the city of Irvine with the Irvine company, who was the landowner, yet we have to build a certain amount of units in the legal boundaries of the city of Irvine, yet we're not allowed to use the largest single available space. And I'm not advocating we should. I love our open space, and I don't think we should. The other two areas would have to be around John Wayne Airport, what we call the Irvine Business Center, where we have a lot of mixed use and vertical development. And then the third and final one is, and I don't want to get, Wendy's a little further off, but our friends in Lake Forest too concerned. But everything on the eastern portion of our city is basically concrete tilt up, commercial, and a little bit of kind of light medical and light industrial. And that was all built up because of the air traffic issues regarding the El Toro Marine Base and the flight patterns of the military and the Marine jets. So that's a possible area that we could do redevelopment to. But this is totally embryonic. This is just spitballing now, Mike.
When you say, we've got a question here that just came in. When you say vertical development citywide, can you better define vertical, I guess, a number of floors? And do you see that in a particular geographic spot of Irvine, or do you see going up vertically citywide?
Yeah, I do. We have, we mentioned we have these two job centers, looking at the map of Orange County and then the city of Irvine on the left of the map, if you will, just adjacent to John Wayne Airport, Irvine's part. John Wayne intersects with Newport Beach, cities of Santa Ana, and I don't think Tustin's adjacent, but it's very close. And then
Jamboree Corridor.
Yeah, we're right there. And, part of that area has been developed into a really neat, again, it's had its fits and its starts We're always looking to do better things and move people. And I think we have a pedestrian bridge on the way on one of the main arterials called Jamboree Road. But I will tell you that we do have a fair amount of, apartment communities, multifamily, 10, 11 story plus product being built there. In what we kind of call colloquially the core of Irvine, everywhere sort of from that road on the left and then going through the villages of Irvine that were laid out by the Irvine Company and the master architect, William Pereira, who designed UC Irvine and LAX Airport and all kinds of other neat stuff on behalf of the Irvine family. That core of villages between that Jamboree and then going to this other side called Sand Canyon, where the El Toro Marine Base starts, there's really nothing. It's completely, single family apartment communities, neighborhoods serving retail and, a little bit of neighbors, light commercial type stuff. So we really don't have much space in there whatsoever. And that's probably where we get that's where most of the people live. That's where they're driving their cars to and from work and to their schools for their kids. And that's the area that probably we're going to want to protect the most.
Thank you, Mike. Great perspective for the city of Irvine. And looks like we have our technological issues resolved with Honorable Wendy Bucknum. So we're going to invite Wendy Bucknum back in. And maybe we can start over a little bit, Honorable Wendy, to talk about your service on SCAG and maybe particularly your service as the voting delegate for the SCAG subcommittee and how all of this comes together and what you also see for the city of Mission Viejo.
Okay, well, I'll first share that how this all kind of came about was early last year, and I'm just doing a sound check. Everybody good?
Yeah, you look good now.
Yes.
I will not let technology overcome, I swear. So early last year, the Orange County Council of Governments did ask if I would serve on SCAG's RHNA subcommittee. And as I was sharing earlier, and don't know how much got cut off, although I work full time, I decided to really undertake this subcommittee mission because it really is a perfect complement to what I do professionally during the day, which is, I'm a residential community management company vice president and work with Associate, which Steve mentioned earlier. I'm on the Orange County BIA board, which I was on before I was on city council, just a little bit of trivia. And my position as OCOG board member, and then of course my position as City of Mission Viejo council member. So my objective really on being on RHNA on the subcommittee was pretty straightforward. I wanted to identify and influence and protect the interests of Orange County jurisdictions throughout 2020. I really did not go into this thinking about what am I going to do for Mission Viejo. I really did see it as a bigger, I was representing really Orange County. So here we are 14 months later, and I can candidly tell you that the process was very complicated. I mean, it was technical. You heard Maya, and you can tell how technical it is. And she's the perfect person to be in that position to provide this support to us because she gets all the technical aspects of it. And then I would underline it was political. So I really did know that under the backdrop of the housing directives that were coming out of Sacramento, that this would be a challenge, but the challenges really did far exceed my expectations. And I'm going to just share, as Maya noted, the process is really still simmering away. So we have 6 more months of work ahead. We have draft RHNA numbers and final numbers that'll be issued in October. And this has been a monumental task of trying to find, many different sites for the placement of these. And it's a difficult and challenging process. Now, it isn't our job to find the sites, but it's our job to come up with the process and the order that it should be in. So what I would say, based on my observation, is just 2 things. First, with the state's HCD stubborn and really technically questionable directive, to require 6 counties in Southern California to plan for 1.3 million units during the next 10 years. It was really clear that there was going to be some winners and some losers in this situation. So jurisdictions in Orange County and Los Angeles really suffered the biggest hits because this is because of the RHNA's methodology's heavy emphasis of placing new housing in job-rich and transit-rich areas, yet not taking into consideration the ability of coastal jurisdictions to physically accommodate, and also Irvine with airport and those restrictions that are required. That was difficult to deal with. And then 2, it's possible. Is it really possible for us to develop a methodology that's fair and equitable to distribute the 1.3 million to 197 jurisdictions in the SCAG region? So we were concerned. I was concerned that a one size fits all, and a lot of my colleagues shared the sentiment. That formula would not be embraced by large and small, urban and rural, built out or room to grow, and the 6 diverse areas. So that the answer to that was no. It was a difficult task. So the SCAG region is basically immense. It's 19 million population, really comprises half of the population of California. So, but each of the region is distinct. So I would say each of these different areas is important to consider. Some areas have room for growth and capacity to grow, and some have more limited areas that they can do this. So the Orange County delegation really did we fought hard to try to support a RHNA methodology that really respected a local visionary or local visions for growth. And that was the number that was submitted the first time that Mayan mentioned. And we did find out that, it unfortunately, it wasn't going to be accepted by the state. So our efforts were opposed and defeated by other counties and the city of Los Angeles. So this adopted, by the way, this impacted not only Orange County, but also the gateway cities that are really the gateway along the Los Angeles, kind of the perimeter of the LA city proper. So this methodology assigns about 60% or 840,000 units out of the 1.3 million to our area. So next, where are we going to go next? So we currently, as an Orange County, have 1.1 million housing units, and SCAG is asking us now for an additional 182,000 more units. So this is 3 times greater than the 58,000 units that were constructed in Orange County from 2010 to 2019. So a question pops into my head, do we even have a workforce large enough to construct all the units in Orange County that this would impact? So, and perhaps even tougher than the 182,000 units is really the affordability requirement. So almost 50% of these units, or 90,000 units, will be affordable to very low or low income housing. So we know there's very little subsidies that are associated with this. They really typically go to disadvantaged communities. So I would just say for our building industry partners that are watching this webcast, how will you be able to stomach a 50% affordability requirement, especially when the subsidies can easily reach $350,000 to $400,000 per unit to make the projects pencil out? And this was a question that I asked repeatedly when I was sitting in these RHNA subcommittees. So basically what I will say for Mission Viejo, to your point, Mike, is that we're looking at a RHNA number of 2,200 housing units, of which 1,100 must be affordable. So we have 3 vacant sites. I'll just give you, because we're a master plan community in the entire city, one of which is a single family detached lot. The other 2 are RHNA sites from the prior RHNA cycles, which have been sitting untouched for 2 RHNA cycles because of the lack of subsidies to help for the affordable unit component. So some jurisdictions have vacant land. to be able to plan for their future housing needs. But other jurisdictions similar to Mission Viejo and Irvine, as Mike had shared earlier, we have more limited sites. So we'll need to look at rezoning underperforming commercial or other properties that in order to make way for the RHNA units. But the absolute challenge will be the 50% affordability requirement. And we currently have developers that are balking at 15% affordable units as part of the housing project, because again, I understand that the projects have to pencil, and I think we all on this call understand they have to pencil, or you're just not going to be built and they'll sit empty. So Mission Viejo's RHNA, it really is nothing compared to astronomical RHNA numbers like for cities in northern Orange County. For example, Garden Grove, as a result of the RHNA methodologies, emphasis of the redirecting the housing near transit and jobs, they will have more planned for more than 19,000 housing units, which is the equivalent of having to build 40% of the number of housing units that already exist in the community. Just think about that. I mean, that is crazy. So RHNA's really, in the end, it was, this is where the politics came in. I felt that it was really politically driven. It was really unfair to small communities that will receive a higher number of RHNA units due to their proximity to the jobs and the transit. And they will have to look to rezoning commercial properties. Now, we all know that some of these commercial properties, and, you know, there's tax implications and impact that will impact our city budgets, et cetera, and our revenue. So I just want to share, like, where are we going? I want to share with you some additional efforts that we've been pursuing in collaboration with the League of Cities and also our Orange County legislators in Sacramento to put some reason and reasonableness into the RHNA implementation. Our city managers have been meeting with our state legislatures over the last few months, and at every single meeting, we have concluded with a summary letter of asks that, number one, that Orange County seeks to reduce the barriers for the RHNA implementation. Because some of the barriers are right now, you have to prove that those folks, I mean, I'll get into the details of that, but basically you have to prove that those sites that you're going to that are potentially commercial actually are going to be able to be utilized to build housing. So you'll have to produce some documents, and I'll share some of those in a moment. But we've been sharing this with Senator Morlock, Senator Bates, Assemblywoman Petrie Norris. So we have been working very closely with the city of Irvine, really kind of providing some real world comments back to HCD on some draft requirements that we really do think HCD could impose for any site that's currently developed with non-residential. So if a developer seeks to build residential units, we are going to have to ask you to provide us with copies of the lease agreement. If you're going to build it at a shopping center, for example, we're going to ask you to provide us with copies of the lease agreements that have been executed with all the tenants to prove to HCD that these units will no longer exist, and the site can therefore be considered an eligible RHNA site. So I know the city of Irvine has asked for these requirements to undergo a review and vetting really by the building community, because we see this as a significant impact, and even being able to do the things that we want to try to do, there's a barrier put in front of us, and the League of Cities is working on this with us as well. So with that being said, while the numbers are really concerning, we really have had little influence in changing the numbers, but I am appreciative of all of the Orange County partners that really did push for some reason and common sense. So down the line, the concerns and frustrations that our existing residents will be voicing when we're changing all the zoning, because we know that that's what will come before us. They won't go to the state. We will have to advise them that we realize this, but this is coming from the state, from Sacramento, and we have to keep moving forward with this. And I want to say I want to reiterate, if the city doesn't adopt a housing element that addresses the RHNA allocation, it really will face the risk of litigation by the state, potentially halts in the issuance of any residential building permits, so that impacts the building community. And that could be impacted during the entire time frame of when the housing elements are not in compliance. And of course, then there's also incurring the financial penalties as well. So that being said, it really is a long and difficult road ahead. And that was kind of the summary of what I wanted to present to everybody that's on the call. And I thank you for being here.
Well, you really your summary sentence really struck a chord with me, and that is, in the city of Huntington Beach, having a compliant housing element is critical. And as most people that are on and watching know, that Huntington Beach was become the poster child of not having a compliant housing element, and was sued by the state, Gavin Newsom, over not having a housing element in compliance. We do now have a compliant housing element, mostly because we were pursuing SB2 funding. And SB2 funding, of course, is grant funding that funds things like navigation centers, affordable housing, but you do have to have a compliant housing element.
Yeah.
And I think that, maybe one of the things that all of us should be taking away and thinking about as we go back to our respective cities is that what are we going to be doing internally to look at having multiple pathways forward in this RHNA cycle. One, of course, is, at least maybe for the city of Huntington Beach, is the appeals process. The second, of course, is potentially litigation. And the third, of course, that I would be an advocate for, and that is a parallel pathway to compliance, looking at different scenarios. I don't think really anybody likes the adopted scenario except for the Inland Empire, because they have a reduction in units by forcing the units to coastal LA and Orange County. And I guess that's shame on us for being a jobs creation machine and a transportation creation machine. We get penalized for our successes. So we look at that methodology and that number scenario. For Huntington Beach, it went from 3,612 units, I think, to 13,000 and some change. So we certainly are in all this boat together. The fewer units that we have get pushed down to Mission Viejo or get pushed into Irvine, or I don't even know where they would go into Garden Grove. I mean, you laid out the perspective very well there,
yeah,
Wendy. And so we have to look at, a parallel path to compliance to include, the worst case scenario, maybe even the Cerritos model, and maybe even staff's methodology that was presented probably a year ago, and have our planning staff look at, what can we do to be compliant under multiple scenarios. And that's what we're going to be looking at in the city of Huntington Beach. We're a lot like Mission Viejo, probably less like Irvine, and that we were largely built out into the 70s. Mission Viejo still has some land to go. They still have, Rancho Mission Viejo to develop on.
That's part of the county. That's not part of the city.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, all right.
Right.
Well, you'll annex it because it's called Rancho Mission Viejo.
I know, and we love that because it all started with Mission Viejo.
That's right. Well, and like you, we have a lot of 1960s, 1970s era strip malls. And Wendy, you mentioned commercial and sales tax revenue. And I think it's worth doing some analysis, too. We had a project that was built in Huntington Beach. It was the last one of the Beach Edinger Quarter specific plan. It's called Luce, and it's on the corner of Edinger and Gothard. And it replaced a strip mall. And some of the residents were saying, well, we lost sales tax revenue and this wasn't smart. And so internally, we looked at to see what the net sales tax revenue to the city was, and it was about $35,000 a year. With 500 new units and an average of $10,000, maybe even $15,000 per household in new spending, we're able to conservatively say that nearly the sales tax is probably doubled at the sacrifice, of course, of a strip mall that's gone. But some of those things require some analysis to see, is this a smart decision or a bad decision? I mean, I don't think we'd want to get rid of a Rolls-Royce dealership that was selling 100 Rolls-Royces a year. But you look at, okay, $35,000, maybe that's not so good. And then before I turn it back over to Steve for closing and thanking the sponsors, we did get a question in on how does this affect future elections. And it's an issue that I certainly wrestle with all the time in Huntington Beach, where we have a contingent of citizens that don't want to see change. And we're not talking wholesale change, we're talking incremental change and preparing for the next generations. And really that answer for local electeds is Sacramento. I mean, that's really where this is coming from, because representatives of SCAG and local elected officials are really tasked with doing one thing, and that's following state law and following the state legislature. We're not leading them, they're leading us. And when we don't have a compliant housing element, changing who's on the city council doesn't change the fact that you still don't have a compliant housing element. And so anyway, we have to really communicate that message that, you know, since Huntington Beach went out of compliance with the housing element back in May of 2015, we saw 2017, 18, and 19, we saw an avalanche of bills that got signed by both governors. I'm thinking there's nearly 50 bills that were signed, most of which address housing element noncompliance. And as Wendy said, that, you know, with not having a compliant housing element, cities risk losing the ability to plan and have the state come in and take over your planning department and not issue permits, not allow you to issue permits, issue fines, and prevent you from receiving grants. And since we're all in this together, you know, I guess that's why I'm such a big fan of SCAG, and I don't know if fan is the right word, but I believe in the mission, just like Wendy does, that, you know, we're not single cities, we're not sovereign nations, we're part of the mosaic of Southern California, 197 cities, and really we're part of San Diego too, even though they have Sandag. What we do and how we plan for transportation housing has an effect on them, and likewise. But be that as it may, we still have to think about our 196 other neighbors as we go through the appeals process and maybe try to appeal and have some other cities take more. How do we get less? But I'll be advocating in Huntington Beach for parallel paths of figuring out some compliance methodology or some compliance pathway for multiple scenarios, hoping for the best case scenario, but planning for the worst case scenario. And with that, Mr. Lamont, I'm going to turn this back over to the BIA, who was gracious enough to host this event and provide this forum and get the sponsors and get what an audience. You had a huge number of participants. So thank you for putting this together, Mr. Lamont.
Thank you. I appreciate everyone's time today as well. And you know, running this webinar means that I get to make the executive call and go a little bit over on time to ask a question that I hear a lot, actually, because I will sometimes do a roadshow on this, and RHNA is obviously one of the biggest topics. But ADUs, accessory dwelling units, I don't think it's been mentioned just yet, but it's one of the main questions I get is, will ADUs, or because I don't think it's currently the case, but will ADUs eventually be counted towards your RHNA number? This is obviously a question for Mayanne. Mayanne, I'd love to know your thoughts.
Yes, ADUs definitely can count towards meeting your RHNA need. It just depends on the affordability of the unit to determine which income category. So there are some constraints, but they can count. And part of what SCAG is doing with our REAP, our regional funding for housing, we're looking actually at a capacity analysis to help our jurisdictions determine affordability and also capacity to insert into their housing elements to determine how much credit they can get.
Interesting. Very good. Perfect answer. Again, I want to thank everybody who participated today. I want to thank our panelists, Mike Posey, Mayanne Johnson, Wendy Bucknum, Mike Carroll. Thank you so much. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Cox Castle Nicholson, for presenting this webinar with us today. And with that, we are adjourned, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And if anybody's still on, ADU stands for accessory dwelling unit, which is, that was the last question. So that's it. Goodbye, everybody.